You're watching The Legal Breakdown. All right, so Glenn, we have some major news today that I wanted to cover with you. 3 of Trump's accomplices, including his own former attorney, have been indicted in Wisconsin. So first question is from the cynic in me, and then we'll start with the bad stuff, get to the good stuff. But if Donald Trump becomes president in November, what happens to a prosecution like this? This is a state prosecution, so what would happen here?
Chances are very good, Brian, that these state court prosecutions would go away. Donald Trump would have a couple of opportunities to try to, for example, use the Constitution's supremacy clause to try to kill or at least delay all state prosecutions against him. And of course, he could also try to kill those prosecutions, those state court proceedings in which he might not even be a charged defendant, but his dirty lawyers have been charged as part of the conspiracy to steal the 2020 election. So, if he couldn't succeed by sort of twisting and contorting the supremacy clause to get rid of those state cases, I hate to even say this because it sounds stranger than fiction, but he could simply use the military, deploy them to the states, and make sure that the state authorities dismiss the cases. And from a man who has promised us he'll be a dictator on day one, would we put that past Donald Trump?
Right. Well, I got to ask, Donald Trump himself is an indicted defendant in Georgia, but for this case in Wisconsin, he's not listed. It's Kenneth Chesbro and 2 other of his associates. So would he be able to do anything to prevent a case where he's not even a listed defendant from moving forward even if he's the president, but this is a state prosecution?
Brian, I don't want to be melodramatic, but a dictator can do whatever he damn well pleases.
Yeah.
So can he do it legitimately, constitutionally, lawfully under the laws of the state? Probably not. Can he accomplish it nonetheless if he chooses to be a dictator? Probably.
Right. Our laws are only as certain as the people who are there to uphold them decide to uphold them. And if there's partisan hacks, many of whom we've seen present themselves, from Aileen Cannon all the way up to Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, then that's it. Again, this stuff only holds insofar as the people who are responsible for making it hold decide to abide by the rules that are put in place. Glenn, Kenneth Chesbro, for example, this is one of the indicted defendants here in this Wisconsin case. He's already cooperating in Georgia in a similar prosecution. When you've got one cooperating witness in one state, doesn't it all but guarantee their cooperation in other states? These cases are so similar.
It's a great point. It all but guarantees it, but I think as we are coming to learn, it's not a guarantee. It's almost easier to talk about the states in which Kenneth Chesbro is not indicted or an unindicted co-conspirator. We might, save some time there. But seriously, it's hard to keep track of all of the jurisdictions in which Kenneth Chesbro, one of Donald Trump's dirty lawyers and one of the architects of the fake elector scheme, is sort of free and clear, because we know he's not only indicted for the RICO conspiracy down in Georgia in state court, he pleaded guilty. He pleaded guilty to a conspiracy to forge documents as part of the criminal scheme in Georgia. Of course, now he's also indicted in Wisconsin. He is also an unindicted co-conspirator in the federal prosecution of Donald Trump in New York. And Brian, when you're an unindicted co-conspirator, when Jack Smith puts you in there, not by name, but identifies him in substance as somebody who was a criminal associate, a co-conspirator of Donald Trump in Trump's efforts to steal the 2020 election, you can bet the next thing coming in the federal case in D.C. to Kenneth Chesbro and the other unindicted co-conspirators is an indictment. So the point you make is an excellent one. Kenneth Chesbro already pleaded guilty in Georgia. So why in the world is he now popping up as either an indicted co-conspirator in state court prosecutions, an unindicted co-conspirator in a federal prosecution? Because the prevailing wisdom is, if you're a defendant and you've pleaded guilty in one jurisdiction and you committed virtually identical or extremely similar conduct in other jurisdictions and you're being criminally pursued for it, you want to cut your losses. You want to enter into what's called a global plea and cooperation agreement. What you do is you extinguish your criminal liability in all jurisdictions and you agree to cooperate with each prosecutor in each state and in federal court to, try to make right what you did so very wrong back when you were trying to steal the 2020 election in league with Donald Trump and others. So it's a real curiosity as to how it is Kenneth Chesbro can be cooperating with Georgia prosecutors, but can end up picking up new indictments in other states.
I mean, it's possible that they could have just indicted him knowing that it's only a matter of time, if not inevitable, that he'll be cooperating momentarily with these people. And so that's why they just kind of did it in a perfunctory manner, knowing that that they've already got him picked off at this point.
And Brian, let me give you a little bit of inside baseball as to why sometimes we indict someone who is already cooperating, because it gives them cover. Now, Chesbro's cover is already blown because he openly pleaded guilty and is cooperating in Georgia. But I can tell you, as a prosecutor, when I was going after gang cases and RICO organizations, we had defendants come to the table quietly, behind the scenes, without any of their co-conspirators knowing about it, agree to plead guilty, but they wanted their name to appear in the public indictment. Why? Because it gave them cover. It gave them plausible deniability with their fellow gang members, their co-conspirators. They could send a signal, hey, I'm staying strong. I'm not flipping on y'all. And it wasn't until the last minute when we were required to disclose that they would be one of the witnesses against the sort of remaining co-defendants, gang members who were going to go to trial. So, there are often good reasons to make it look like somebody's being indicted, even though they are quietly behind the scenes cooperating with the authorities.
Right, and normally I would say that a prosecution that involves politicians doesn't deserve, it's too hysterical to liken it to a gang prosecution or a mafia prosecution. But in this case, it's perfectly apt. Donald Trump has set this up so that that's actually the closest thing we can liken this to right here. Glenn, how can the testimony from a good cooperating witness like Kenneth Chesbro, for example, who, again, is cooperating right now in Georgia, how can that impact other cases where we would expect that he would be a cooperating witness as well? Is it kind of the thing like a rising tide lifts all ships, and so his testimony in one case will we assume that it'll help all of the cases?
It may. It depends on whether there's factual overlap with respect to what Chesbro did down in Georgia and what he and other co-conspirators might have done in Wisconsin or other states. But typically, once a cooperating witness, once a domino falls, other dominoes typically begin to fall, because the most valuable evidence prosecutors can come into when they're investigating a criminal organization, a gang, and, make no mistake about it, this is a gang case down in Georgia because there is a RICO conspiracy charge brought against Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, Jeffrey Clark, John Eastman, Kenneth Chesbro, Sidney Powell, and many others. So the most valuable evidence prosecutors can come into is an insider, somebody who's on the inside of the criminal conspiracy, because a criminal conspiracy is designed to sort of shield itself from public view, what's going on inside the conspiracy. So ordinarily, once you get one or more co-conspirators to flip, and those dominoes just keep falling one after another, I still find it a bit of a curiosity that there have been only 4 cooperating witnesses in the Georgia RICO prosecution. 4 defendants pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate, and yet we still have some 15 who are pending trial down there. I still believe once trial dates are set and it becomes very real in a concrete way to the other remaining co-conspirators, co-defendants in the Georgia case, you're going to begin to see more dominoes fall.
Glenn, I want to go back to the prospect of Trump winning in November for just a brief second as it relates to this Wisconsin case. Knowing that Donald Trump could do everything he could to, whether it's perverting the supremacy clause or just, even trying to bring the military in and try to get this case thrown out that way, would it be in the state's best interest if they know that they can't bring these cases forward before the election? And I'm talking about not just Wisconsin, but also Michigan, Nevada, Georgia. Would it be in everybody's best interest to slow walk this thing, knowing that if Trump is in the Oval Office, he's going to do everything he can to throw these cases out. So to slow walk these things for 4 years so that we could at least hope that if there's any chance of getting these things to move forward, that knowing that the only way it's going to happen is after 2028.
Yeah, it's probably an academic question because it looks like there's no chance any of these cases will go to trial before the November election. So what happens then? And your point is a good one. But here's the thing. Whether those cases are in a holding pattern for 4 years in the horrific event Donald Trump is back in the White House for another 4 years, which I don't believe for a minute will happen, whether you keep the case in a holding pattern or you set a trial date, or you're mid-trial, you're pending sentencing, or the trial has been complete and convicted defendants are now serving their sentence. If a dictator is in charge of, the reins of federal power, that spells trouble regardless of the stage at which the state court prosecution is.
Right, that's a great point. I mean, I'm thinking within the confines of what you would do in a legitimate democracy, and that's very clearly, I mean, to Donald Trump's own words, it's very clearly what he's trying to undermine here. Let's finish off with this. We're now looking at 19 indicted in Georgia, 18 in Arizona, 16 in Michigan, 6 in Nevada, 3 in Wisconsin, and likely more coming. Do you think the justice system is finally taking the threat seriously here, or do you think they should be doing more?
Yeah, well, if justice delayed is justice denied, then, justice has been denied for a very long time. We're going on 4 years from the insurrection, from the attack on the U.S. Capitol designed to criminally overturn the results of a presidential election. But I say better late than never. So here's the beef I have at the moment, Brian. The states seem to be doing their job, even if they're doing it a little bit more slowly and cautiously than is optimal. They're charging people who violated state law. But this is really a federal problem. What happened to our nation on and around January 6th, not just a state problem, it's a federal problem. And we need to have a federal solution. The federal solution looks like federal prosecutions for everybody who was involved, who violated federal laws on and around January 6th. And, the longer we have to wait for the Department of Justice to indict the hierarchy of the insurrection, the suits as opposed to the boots of the insurrection, the command structure, people who are being charged in states like Giuliani and Mark Meadows and corrupt DOJ official Jeffrey Clark and John Eastman, they're being charged in state court. But they committed federal crimes. They inarguably committed federal crimes. And it's a good step that they are unindicted co-conspirators in the federal case in D.C. But the longer we go without any federal charges being brought, I'm sorry to say, in a way, it almost breathes life into Donald Trump's ridiculous, incessant witch hunt claim. Because if all of these horrible federal crimes were committed, why is it he's the only one that is being pursued in federal court for what happened on January 6th? It really is, long past time for the federal government, as compared to the states, the federal government to start charging the hierarchy, the command structure of the insurrection.
Yeah, and we've seen, this kind of overly cautiousness from the federal government before, and to your exact point, failing to hold everybody involved accountable really does kind of only embolden these people to continue doing it anymore. So, of course, with that said, we'll continue beating this drum because I think it's especially important to do exactly that, to put pressure on these people by virtue of kind of exposing these narratives in the media here. So for those watching, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.